The night before my anniversary, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was excited. I hadn't been excited about our anniversary in years. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle, the creak of the hallway floorboard, the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the distant sound of a truck moving through the neighborhood at 2 a.m. 63 years old, and I was lying in my own bed, like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome, careful not to move too much, careful not to breathe too loud. I should have recognized that feeling for what it was. I didn't. Not yet. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 11 years being the kind of man who shows up. I showed up to my wife's mother's funeral when her own siblings didn't. I showed up to my stepson Derek's high school graduation, even after he told me point blank that I wasn't his real father, and he didn't want me sitting in the family section. I sat 3 rows back and clapped when they called his name anyway. I showed up to every dinner, every argument, every uncomfortable silence at the kitchen table, when Derek came home from college and looked through me like I was furniture. I showed up because I loved my wife, or I loved who I thought she was when we met. Her name is Sandra. We met at a church potluck in the fall. She was 49, I was 52, both of us widowed, both of us thinking maybe there was still something good left ahead. She had Derek, who was 15 at the time, quiet and sullen in the way teenage boys can be, and I thought, give it time. Teenage boys come around. I had been patient my whole life. I could be patient a little longer. What I didn't understand then, what took me years to see clearly, is that there's a difference between patience and surrender. I kept mistaking one for the other. The first year was good. Sandra laughed easily back then. She'd reach across the table and put her hand on mine when I said something that made her happy. And I'd feel like maybe I'd finally gotten something right. Derek tolerated me the way a cat tolerates a new piece of furniture. Occasionally curious, mostly indifferent, sometimes openly hostile. I told myself that was fine. I didn't need him to love me. I just needed us to coexist. Then Sandra's ex-husband, Derek's father, started coming back around. His name was Ray. They'd been divorced for 8 years when Sandra and I got together, and from everything Sandra told me in those early months, the divorce had been ugly and necessary. Ray drank. Ray disappeared. Ray made promises and broke them the way other people breathed, automatically, without thinking. But Ray was Derek's father, and Derek worshipped him with the particular ferocity of a boy who'd been abandoned and couldn't afford to admit it. When Ray started showing up again, I was careful. I told Sandra it was fine. Derek needed his father. I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I meant it genuinely in the beginning. But Ray had opinions about everything, about how Sandra ran the house, about what Derek should do with his life, about me. The first time I heard it secondhand, through something Derek let slip at dinner, I thought I'd misunderstood. Derek said his dad thought it was strange that a man would move into a woman's house and just start paying for everything without putting his name on anything. Like I was hiding something. Like there was an angle. I looked at Sandra across the dinner table, and she didn't meet my eyes. I want to stop here for a moment, because I think this is the part that people on the outside never fully understand. When you love someone, you build a whole architecture around that love. Reasons, explanations, interpretations that let you keep believing what you need to believe. Every time something happened that should have been a clear signal, I found a way to frame it differently. Sandra didn't defend me to Derek that night because she didn't want to make things worse. She didn't push back on Ray because she was tired, and co-parenting is complicated. She didn't tell me about the conversations Ray was having with Derek about our finances because she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. I built that architecture beam by beam for 9 years. When Derek was 19, he dropped out of his first semester of community college and moved back home. Sandra asked me if it was okay. I said yes. I meant it. The boy needed time to figure himself out. I understood that. What I didn't anticipate was that figuring himself out would involve Ray coming over 3 or 4 times a week. The two of them sitting in the living room I'd furnished, drinking beer from the refrigerator I stocked, watching television on the screen I'd bought while I ate dinner alone at the kitchen table. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself I was giving Derek space. One evening I came home from work. I was still consulting part-time, structural engineering, nothing glamorous but steady. And Ray was sitting at my kitchen table. Not the living room, the kitchen. He had a plate of food in front of him that Sandra had made, and he looked up at me when I walked in with an expression that I can only describe as comfortable, like he belonged there and I was the one who'd knocked on the wrong door. Sandra said, "Ray stayed for dinner. I hope that's okay." It wasn't a question. I said, "Sure," and went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes before I came back down. I should have said something that night. I know that now. But I kept coming back to Derek, to the image of this boy who'd grown up without a consistent father, who finally had Ray present and sober and showing up. And I told myself that whatever discomfort I swallowed was worth it if Derek was healing. I genuinely believed that. I want to be honest about that. The mortgage on the house was in Sandra's name. She'd bought it before we married, and when we talked about it early on, she'd been uncertain about refinancing, about the paperwork, about complications with her credit. I said it was fine. I started contributing to the mortgage payment voluntarily. First half, then eventually all of it, because it was our home, and that's what you do when something is yours, even if the paper doesn't say your name. I also covered utilities, groceries, Derek's car insurance, Derek's phone plan, a medical procedure Sandra needed that insurance didn't fully cover. I didn't keep a ledger. That's not who I am. Ray apparently kept a ledger in his head. I found out much later, from something Derek said in anger during one of our arguments, that Ray had been telling Sandra for years that I was controlling her by paying for things, that men who paid for everything without demanding their name on the deed were either foolish or manipulative, and he wasn't sure which one I was. That Sandra should think carefully about what she was allowing to develop in her own home. The irony of Ray, a man who'd contributed nothing to his son's upbringing for nearly a decade, lecturing my wife about financial dynamics in our marriage was not lost on me. But Sandra was listening. I just didn't know it yet. The anniversary that woke me up was our 9th. I'd made a reservation at a restaurant Sandra had mentioned wanting to try, quietly mentioned in passing months before, the kind of thing I filed away because I paid attention. I'd gotten her a gift, nothing extravagant, a bracelet she'd admired in a shop window the previous winter, but I'd remembered and I'd gone back for it. On the morning of our anniversary, I came downstairs and found a note on the kitchen table. Not a card, a note, torn from a notepad, the kind we kept by the telephone, blue ink, Sandra's handwriting. Derek and I are going to Ray's place in Tucson for the long weekend. We'll be back Tuesday. It would probably be better if you found somewhere else to stay while we're gone. We can talk when I get back. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd installed new cabinets the summer before, because Sandra said she'd always wanted white shaker-style cabinets, the kitchen where I'd spent 11 years making coffee and eating breakfast and trying to be a decent husband. And I read that note until the words stopped looking like words. It would probably be better if you found somewhere else to stay. She was gone already. The house was quiet in that particular way houses get when everyone has left and taken their presents with them. Derek's bedroom door was open. Sandra's side of the closet still had her clothes in it, but her overnight bag was missing. She'd packed while I was sleeping. She'd been deliberate about it. I sat down in a kitchen chair. I want to tell you I had some immediate moment of clarity, some clean anger that propelled me into action. I didn't. I sat in that chair for a long time, long enough that the morning light moved across the floor and changed color, long enough that I made a pot of coffee and drank half of it without tasting any of it. At some point, I don't know exactly when, something settled in me. Not anger, something quieter and more permanent than anger. I had spent 11 years in this house trying to earn my place in a family that had already decided the terms of my belonging. I had paid for the roof over their heads. I had kept the lights on and the pantry full and said yes when I should have said no and stayed when I should have walked. And the woman I loved had packed her bag in the middle of the night to go spend our anniversary in Tucson with her ex-husband. I picked up my phone and called my accountant. Then I called my attorney. Then I called my brother, who lives 40 minutes away, and told him I needed a place to stay for a few days. He said, "I'll make up the guest room." I didn't move everything out. I want to be clear about that, not because I was being passive, but because I understood something important. The house was Sandra's, legally. I was not going to be the man who stripped the place in a rage. I packed what was mine: my clothes, my tools, my father's watch, the framed photograph from my first wedding that I kept on the nightstand and that Sandra had never asked me to remove, some books, my laptop, 2 trips to my car. Then I sat at the kitchen table one more time and wrote a note of my own. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't make threats or accusations. I wrote 3 sentences. The first said that I had found somewhere else to stay. The second said that I would not be available by phone for a few days. The third said that the accounts we shared, the joint checking account that my paychecks had been going into for 9 years, had been separated as of that morning, and that my contributions to the mortgage and household expenses would be pausing while we figured out what came next. I left it on the kitchen table in the same spot where I'd found hers. My brother's guest room had a window that faced east. I'd forgotten how much I liked waking up to morning light coming straight at me instead of filtered through curtains. I slept better those first 2 nights than I had in years, and that itself told me something I'd been avoiding knowing. Sandra called on Saturday. I let it go to voicemail. She called again on Sunday morning. Then Derek called. That one surprised me. Then a number I didn't recognize called, and I didn't answer that either. But when I checked later, it was Ray's number, which told me everything I needed to know about the nature of the emergency. Tuesday afternoon, Sandra called 7 times in 2 hours. I listened to the first voicemail she left. Her voice was different in it, tight and slightly higher than usual. The voice she used when she was trying to sound calm and wasn't succeeding. She said she was home. She said the note I'd left had scared her. She said she wanted to talk. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this way. I noticed she didn't say she was sorry. I called her back on Wednesday morning. She started by saying that I had overreacted, that her note hadn't meant what I seemed to think it meant. She just needed a few days of space, and she'd worded it badly, and she didn't understand why I'd needed to involve an attorney and an accountant like I was making some kind of statement. I let her finish. Then I asked her one question. I asked her how long she had been discussing our finances with Ray. There was a silence on the phone that went on long enough that I started counting seconds. She said, "Ray worries about me." I said, "That's not what I asked." She said, "He's Derek's father. I can't just cut him out of my life." I said, "I understand that. I've never asked you to. I'm asking how long Ray has been involved in decisions about our marriage." Another silence. "This isn't about Ray," she said finally. "Okay," I said. "You're being very cold," she said. "I'm being clear," I said. "There's a difference." We talked for 40 minutes. She cycled through several different approaches. First the confusion, then the accusation that I was punishing her, then something that sounded close to an apology, but kept pulling back before it landed. Then a kind of exhausted sadness that I recognized as the thing that had always worked on me before, the thing I'd always moved toward, trying to fix it, trying to be the one who made it better. I didn't move toward it this time. I told her that I wasn't going to continue contributing to a household where I was made to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. I told her I thought we needed to be honest about whether this marriage was something she actually wanted or something she'd been maintaining for practical reasons. I told her I cared about her and I was not doing this in anger. I genuinely wasn't, which surprised me a little, but that I was 63 years old and I was not going to spend whatever time I had left sitting 3 rows back from my own life. She said, "I don't want to lose you." I said, "I know, but I think what you don't want to lose is the arrangement." She didn't answer. Derek texted me that afternoon. It was the longest text message he had ever sent me in 11 years. He said that I'd put his mother in a terrible position, that the mortgage payment was due in 10 days, and I knew that. That whatever issues I had could have been handled like an adult instead of me running away and threatening his family. His family. After 11 years, I was still not part of that word when Derek used it. I wrote him back one sentence. "I hope you and your father can help your mother figure out what comes next." He did not respond. My attorney walked me through my options over the following week. Because I had no legal claim to the house, there was no complicated property dispute. What I had contributed over the years, voluntarily, without documentation, out of love and a belief that we were building something together, was legally speaking simply gone. My attorney was careful when she told me this, watching my face for something. I think she expected me to be devastated. I wasn't, or maybe I was, but not about the money. Sandra and I had one more long conversation in person at a coffee shop on a Thursday morning. She came in looking like she hadn't been sleeping well, which I recognized because it was the same look I'd worn for years without ever acknowledging it. She'd brought a list, actually written things down on a piece of paper. All the reasons we should try to work through this. All the things she valued about our marriage. They were real things. I could see that. She wasn't performing. But when I looked at the list, I noticed what wasn't on it. There was nothing about Ray. Nothing about Derek's dismissal of me. Nothing about the 9 years of small erasures. The dinners I'd eaten alone. The conversations I hadn't been invited into. The night she'd packed a bag while I slept and left me a note like I was a tenant who'd missed a payment. There was nothing that acknowledged that anything had been wrong before last weekend. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers for a moment. I said, "I think you're a good person who made me feel invisible for a very long time. And I don't think you even knew you were doing it, which is maybe the hardest part." She looked at her list. Then she looked up at me, and I saw it, the thing I'd been waiting for. Without knowing I was waiting for it. Not guilt, recognition. She recognized what I was describing. She didn't argue. We separated formally 6 months later. The paperwork was quiet and civil, which felt right. Sandra worked out a refinancing arrangement on the house. Derek, from what I understand, picked up extra shifts to help her. Ray apparently was less available once the financial situation changed. I moved into a small place on the east side of town with good morning light and a porch that gets sun in the afternoon. My brother comes over on Sundays and we watch whatever game is on. A woman from my church, a widow, warm and funny, with grown children who seem to actually like her, has had coffee with me twice now, and we're talking about dinner. I am 63 years old. I'm not angry. I want to be careful to say that, because I think people expect anger, and I understand why. But what I feel when I sit on that afternoon porch and let the sun come in is something I hadn't felt in a long time before. I started being honest with myself. I feel like I'm in the right room. I spent 11 years walking carefully through someone else's life, trying to take up just the right amount of space, contributing everything I had, and asking for very little in return, because I was afraid that asking for more would remind everyone that I wasn't supposed to be there. No more of that. My father used to say, "A man who doesn't know his own worth will always find someone willing to name a lower price." I was 52 years old when I met Sandra, and I thought I was past being that man. Turns out, you're never past it. You just have to keep choosing, again and again, to know what you're worth. I know now. That's enough.